Hello, everybody. Bo Prosser here from the Center for Christian Education. Another in our video training series. Today, I am with Dr. Chuck Bugg. Chuck is the senior consultant for preaching at the Center for Christian Education, longtime professor of preaching in our Baptist seminaries and pastoring as well in our Baptist churches. So, Chuck is the resident expert for us at the center, and we are happy to share together. We have an exciting afternoon for you. Over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about uh, preaching for Advent and not looking at the passages, but looking at the processes and trying to put things in an outline form that might work for you. Uh, we understand that we preach to be heard. And Chuck has drilled that into me over time. And Chuck, I thank you for giving me that nugget along the way. The the one question I have, we get 4 to 10,000 messages a day through all kind of media. That number goes up during Christmas, during the holiday season, somewhere probably between 6 and 12,000 messages a day. The average American spends 8 hours on a screen, either computer screen or their phone or their big screen TV. So, how in the world are we to be heard in this day of just the electronic messages coming at us fast and furious? So, how do we get in, Chuck? How do we get our message heard, and how do we get ready to prepare for Advent so people will hear us?
Bo, that's a very good question. And I think it's increasingly difficult for any of us to be heard. With that said, and realizing the plethora of messages that we all receive, I'm still convinced that a pastor who takes the preaching event seriously in preparation, in thinking about ways in which that message can be formed and shaped, ways in which it can be delivered, understands the fact that we have to have variety in terms of the delivery of the preaching and the preparation of the sermon. We have to have stories. We have to have uh, illustrations. We have to have different things in order to be heard. But I'm convinced that somebody who does that and who prepares can be heard. Now, whether people hear us from beginning of the sermon to the end of the sermon, that's doubtful. Most people in listening to a sermon will may stop at a point where it is particularly relevant to them. It may not be the central point that we have, but it may be something that is on their mind that triggers. And I want to say that's okay. Now, I think if that happens every Sunday, where everybody's getting off before you finish the sermon and they never listen to the end of the sermon, then I think you have problems, or we have problems, and we have to go back to reevaluate how we do this. But I am still convinced that a sermon well prepared, well delivered, will be heard by people.
That so a variety of presentation styles, some stories, some quotes, some thoughts to mix it up a little bit, uh, but also to keep things uh, somewhat neat in the presentation. So we're not having fireworks go off from the balcony. We're not coming down from a zip line. We're not raising an angel up in the baptistry, but we're trying to keep people's attention. So uh, today, we are going to do that same thing with getting ready for Advent. We do like neat patterns in presentations. So little short blocks of learning that spur our mind. Sometimes we'll get off the train at one of those, then come back, as you say. So today we're going to look at the past, present, and future of Advent, and to think about giving at least some sort of an outline for entering in and presenting the Advent message. So, Chuck, let's jump in. Tell me a little bit about how past, present, and future, how did that outline come to you and evolve for you?
Well, Bo, I began thinking about Christmas and recognized the fact that there are three dimensions, in my opinion, to Christmas. There is our recalling the event of the birth of Christ, the past. There is recognizing the fact that the Bible calls, for example, in Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus, you must be born from above. The manger in our own life where the Christ can be born. And the future is a part of the lectionary. All of these are a part of the lectionary. The future is where we think about Christ not only as an event of the past, not only as an experience in the present, but also as a hope that we have for the future. Many times that's equated with preaching about the second coming. I don't believe it always has to be that way. Uh, I believe that you and I can use the Christmas event to tell people that there is a future. There is something ahead. We're not just living on memories. We're not just living on present experiences, but we're living on a hope that the Christ who has come, is coming, and will come. And we live with that hope in our lives.
So, what is it about the past? How does thinking about the birth and Bethlehem, especially, how does that impact us as we begin to form our preaching for the Christ event?
When I think about the past, Bo, I remember Fred Craddock telling a story about a pastor who said that he never used the Lucan birth story to talk about Jesus because it was too familiar to people. And Craddock's response is that is precisely the reason that we use the Lucan text, because familiarity and memory are very important in the preaching event. Uh, we don't have to find new ways to say something that is embedded in the lives of people. What we do when we talk about the past, and we talk about Jesus being born, we can come at that in various ways, but we still have the basic characters and the basic movement of that Lucan story. We can come at it from the standpoint of Mary. What is it that Mary pondered? The shepherds who came that night. What is it that motivated them as they listened to the angels to leave what was familiar to them and go to something that was not familiar to them? We can look at it from the standpoint of Joseph. Joseph always seems to be at the edge of things. never really involved in things. And so I think sometimes when we celebrate Christmas and we look at the past, we can be Joseph because sometimes we get so involved in the sort of the secular celebration of Christmas that we get at the edge of things and we don't really focus on the heart of what is going on. So I think it's very, very important for us to emphasize here is God's breaking into the world in flesh. Here is God in flesh in this Jesus of Nazareth, who is born in Bethlehem. And to look at that story and to see the people who are surrounding that story and to see all of that of what that story entails. God's working through the marginalized. God's working through the unexpected people. God's working through those may that we may not choose for in it if we were doing the Christmas story, but God's picking people that seem to be on the edge of life, the marginalized, and God's doing that in our own time, that God can use any of us and all of us if we are willing.
One of the phrases that you've said at other points when we've talked about preaching around the Advent season, you say, "Don't rush to Bethlehem." What do you mean by that?
Well, I think we have to understand that the whole Bethlehem experience comes after a journey of Mary and Joseph, an arduous journey, a journey that is provoked by a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered, which means all the world should be taxed. And I think we have to slow down when we go to Bethlehem.
Mm.
I always think about something that Henry Nouwen did. Henry Nouwen oftentimes spoke in ways that Henry Nouwen, the Danish priest who has been so influential in many of our lives, would talk very slowly because he realized that oftentimes in a whirlwind of words, in a whirlwind of activity, I am the vine, you are the branches, Nouwen would say. Mm. And he would say it at that pace. Christmas, while we feel rushed so many times in what we're doing around Christmas, we need to slow down in the church to focus on the real message of Christmas. So I think the pastor who is able to slow things down and recognize this is a journey, not an event to be told quickly, but the experience of people and slowing it down and recognizing the impact of what is happening in the stable.
I have a friend, Don Henry, who is a songwriter in Nashville. One of my favorite Don Henry songs is "The Road to Paradise is Paradise."
Hmm.
And he talks about things from his past that were so special to him. And as he sings the song, I get lost in the images, like you were saying earlier. Preaching in the past, we all have a memory bank to draw from that can bring us into the promises of God through the birth of Jesus. So, what do we do with Jesus in the present?
Well, we talk about Jesus being born into the world, and we also want to talk about Jesus being born into our own worlds, into our own lives. It's not just enough to have Christmas as an event in the past. What about having it as an event in the present? Where is the Christ being born in my life, in your life? When we look at the New Testament, it's always interesting to me how the image of Christ coming into people's lives is phrased. For example, the word Christian occurs only 3 times. What we have very strong verbs. John says Jesus wants to abide in us.
Mm.
John says Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So that when ministers get up and issue an invitation that says, I want you to become a Christian, what we've done is we've turned it into a noun. It's not like joining the Rotary Club. It's not like joining the Garden Club. It's like a relationship in life.
Yeah,
And in the present, we want to experience that relationship.
absolutely. And one of the phrases of Christmas that is repeated at several places to some of those main characters that you spoke of earlier are the words "fear not."
Mhm.
Uh, in the climate in which we find ourselves, it appeals to me to be able to preach "fear not" to our people. There's a great deal of fear right now. There's a great deal of divisiveness right now. And for us to hear the word of the angels and to pass that on, fear not, uh, maybe will have an impact on the present. Are there other phrases or other images that come to your mind around the present that we might could use?
Bo, I think you pointed to a very, very good thing. I mean, right now, there is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of instability, and a lot of fear. So that these words of Jesus, spoken so many times, do not be afraid,
Mm,
along with the words, peace, my peace,
mm,
I give to you, which I
yes.
think is a very, very important part of that. We've got to be able to say to people that what we're talking about when we talk about peace is not just peace in the sense of a word. We're talking about the peace, my peace, the peace that Christ brings to people's lives. I also think we ought to recognize that the first Christmas happened in a time of great difficulty and uncertainty and fear
Mm,
and people's having to be dislocated
yes.
and Mary and Joseph on this journey that they wouldn't have taken certainly at any time with her being this far along and expecting a child. Christmas happens in a time of crisis. It's always been a time of crisis.
Mm,
Now, how do we pull it into the present to say, yes, we are living in a time of crisis? Do we surrender to the fear? Well, all of us have some of that. Or do we recognize that the final word is, as you've said, do not be afraid,
yeah. Yeah.
my peace. I give to you.
Oh, that's such an awesome word to bring the front part, but also the peace part. Is That's just amazing. Thank you for that. So, uh, the baby Jesus of the past, the living Christ of the present, and the future Christ of the days to come. What do we do for Advent towards a future vision?
Well, again, Bo, I believe it relates a lot to what you've already said, and that is that we have to have some hope for the not yet. I mean, we don't know the shape of the not yet. That's totally out of our hands. Now, do we believe that it's in God's hands? If we do, that gives us a sense of hope. We can't figure it out. But if we believe that God is in the process of working things out in the not yet, in the future of our lives, then we trust in the God who is shaping the future. Whenever I get into the idea that I have to shape the future, that I have to decide uh, what is going to be, I get in trouble because I can't do that. So again, do we trust that not only the past, the present, but do we trust that the future is in the hands of God? If I do, I don't have to know what the future is. I simply move into the future with trust.
Yes. And preparing the way, as John said.
Mhm.
I'm not the one. I'm preparing the way for the one. Uh, we prepare ourselves uh, during Advent. Not only are we waiting during Advent, we're preparing during Advent for the future. So that's a neat little overview for our pastors who can find a way to enter into the Advent conversation. Now, one other point before we go, you and I both know that the month of December is probably the busiest month in the Christian calendar for local congregations. Every Sunday night there's something, every Sunday morning there's something, thousands of Christmas parties in between, rushing with family here and there. And our time can get away from us if we're not careful. You've said something a time or two uh, that intrigues me, and so I want to ask you about that. You've said our people don't expect perfection. So, in the busyness of the season, how do we preach well and relax a bit from the pressure of perfection?
Well, that's a very good point, Bo. If you and I were perfect in being a pastor or preacher, I don't believe our people would be able to relate to us. They have to relate to somebody who is a human being.
Mm.
And before any of us was ever called to be a minister, we were a human being. And after we put the ordination certificate on the wall, we still were human beings with our imperfections, with the struggles that we have. And I think that during the Christmas season, it's not bad for the minister to say to the people, one of the struggles I have during the Christmas season is to be caught up in all of the busyness of the Christmas all that is going on at Christmas. And again, to go back to Henry Nouwen's phrase, can we slow things down a bit?
Mm-hmm.
Can we get up on Sunday realizing that people are busy, but that we have something very vital to say to people's lives, not only at the Christmas season, but at all times? It's not going to be perfect. That's why we don't rely on ourselves. We rely on the Spirit of God to take whatever offering of words and the person that we are and recognize that it is the Spirit of God that makes these things come alive, so that I don't go into study during Christmas or any other time and say, I've got to really find the words to make God come alive. That's impossible.
Yeah.
And that's not our task.
Yeah.
Our task is to give our best offering that we can at any moment and allow the Spirit of God to use that to change people's lives and to change our lives.
So I want to improv with you a minute.
Okay.
If you're willing to play with me,
Yeah.
the pastor might preach 8 times or more during the month of December. The pastor might also be invited to 3 or 4 different Sunday school class parties and be asked to say a word. You might also have to go to the nursing home or retirement center or wherever and bring a devotion. So I would like you to give me one sentence. If you were going to have 10 to 12 different speaking times during the month of December, what is the one sentence you would use to weave through every speaking opportunity that you might have?
I would say, Bo, what all of this that we're doing is about God's breaking in to history and into our lives and into the future. And we need to pay attention to this God who, more than anything else, wants to break into our lives.
That's that's pretty good, Dr. Bugg. Thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I love doing these things, and I just love you putting your brain out here for us uh, to live into the preaching event. Um, the Christmases past that we've been involved with, the Christmases present that we are involved with, and the Christmases of the future to come. Um, One last thing. This will be my first Christmas without my mother and stepfather. Uh, this will be a sad Christmas in many ways. How do we remember that not everybody sitting in the pew is joy, joy, Santa Claus, baby Jesus?
And that's a very, very good point, because uh, grief is accentuated at times, like Christmas. People feel it more. They feel the losses of their lives, the loss of a mother and father, a loss of a job, a loss of a child to addiction, all of these kinds of things. One of the things that we never want to do is to say to people that because Christ comes into our lives, that eliminates losses that we experience.
Mm.
I mean, when we think about the first Christmas, being dislocated is a loss. It would have been much easier to have this baby in Nazareth rather than in some strange inn in Bethlehem. So there are all kinds of things that we can pick up out of the Christmas story that I think say to people, uh, we don't want to hang crepe on the joy of Christmas. At the same time, we want to remember that there are a multiplicity of feelings and experiences that people are recalling, and that the minister is sensitive to those things. Um, so I really like that question, Bo, because again, it slows the minister down
Mm.
to recognize I don't have to go into this thing to create joy and hope and inspiration. I go into this offering and telling the story, which is a multifaceted story of gain and loss,
Mm.
of fear and hope, of dislocation and the birth of a baby, of a mother who pondered whatever she was pondering in her heart, maybe pondering the fact that this child that she was having one day would experience a terrible kind of grief in his life.
Mm. Yes. Chuck, thank you so much. This has just been fabulous. And I just appreciate your words and your insight. Any last words for us as we close?
Well, Bo, again, I would just say for those of us who are preaching, uh, let's we don't have to expect that we have to be any different or deliver anything that is extraordinary or special. Because if we go into it with the idea that we've got to somehow make this extraordinary with our words and with what we do, we want to do as well as we can, but it's not our job to make it extraordinary.
Mm.
I mean, let's realize that this is God's work. We didn't bring Jesus into history. We don't control what Jesus does in our lives. We don't know the future. So there is so much out of our hands, but everything is in the hands of God. And with that, I would say, if we know that, we can relax.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, my friend, for this. We will do other conversations along the way. I hope this helps you, friends, as you prepare your sermons, as you prepare to live into the Advent season, thinking about the past, thinking about the present, thinking about the future. Don't rush to get to Bethlehem. There's so many rich experiences on the road to Bethlehem. Spend some time along the way seeing what you might bring to your people, but also paying attention to what God is bringing to you as the pastor, as the minister in this journey towards Christmas. I'd leave you with the words of Fred Craddock, one of our favorite preachers. Craddock says, uh, when I'm done with a sermon, I hope no one says that's the best sermon I've ever heard. I hope they leave saying, Pastor, you really made me think. I hope we've been able to make you think a little bit today and into the days ahead. Bo Prosser, Chuck Bugg, Center for Christian Education, Bo and the Beard. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you again.